Portlock wasn't just abandoned, it was expelled. This place, tucked into the rugged Alaskan coast, was rich in fish, timber, and promise. It should have been a dream for settlers, yet time and again it drove people away. From crushed skulls and missing hunters to trees discovered rammed upside down into the earth, the site has earned a reputation as one of Alaska's most chilling mysteries. Locals still whisper about it, telling stories of crushed sled dogs, guttural cries in the fog, and heavy footsteps outside their doors. Spanish sailors fled here. British charts carried warnings, Alutiiq elders imposed curfews, and in 1950 the people of Portlock walked away almost overnight. Was it a cursed land, a slaying ground for a monster, or a perfect storm of fear, isolation, and something far beyond human understanding? The very first outsiders to arrive at Portlock weren't looking for horror, they were chasing bounty. The Spanish sailors who touched these shores in the late 1700s were eager for fertile ground, timber, and fish, but almost immediately they felt that something wasn't right. At night, the crew heard haunting cries echoing from the forest. Perfectly healthy men soon became weak and dizzy, overcome by a dread they couldn't name. Within weeks, they abandoned the site, convinced the place was cursed. Just 6 years later, Captain Nathaniel Portlock of the British Navy, a man not given to superstition, sailed in, determined to make the land work for his crew. What he found unnerved him even more. There was an abandoned native village, its home still intact, as though the people had fled in haste. The land was fertile, the hunting plentiful, yet no one remained. Soon his men began to fall ill with the same inexplicable symptoms the Spanish had endured. They whispered of omens and refused to work. Eventually, even Portlock himself relented, pulling anchor and leaving the site behind. What set Portlock apart from other failed colonies was the nature of its menace. There were no enemies firing muskets, no storms dashing ships on the rocks, no famine driving people to desperation. Instead, there were whispers, strange illnesses, and a deepening dread that seemed to press down on the spirit until all a man could think to do was run. Skeptics today suggest environmental causes, toxins in the air, disorienting geology, or perhaps infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below the range of human hearing. Infrasound is known to cause nausea, panic, and dread. Tigers use it to stun prey, and even natural wind tunnels and seismic activity can create its haunting hum. Portlock's geography, with its cliffs, ravines, and pounding surf, would have been the perfect stage for such invisible pressure. Imagine being an 18th-century sailor, exhausted after months at sea, suddenly overcome by dizziness, fear, and the sense that something unseen is closing in. To men of that time, it would have felt like a curse or a demon's presence. Yet even infrasound cannot explain the physical aftermaths that later settlers would discover. The crushed skulls, the mutilated bodies, and the massive footprints pressed deep into the earth. For the native Alutiiq people, the mystery of Portlock was never just about strange sounds or sickness. Their oral traditions warned of the Nantianak, beings often described as half-human, half-beast, towering, hairy giants with the strength to tear down trees and carry people off. They were said to prey on humans in times of scarcity, targeting hunters, women at riverbanks, and those who strayed too far from safety. To outsiders, these stories might have sounded like campfire myths meant to keep children in line. But for the Sugpiaq and Alutiiq, these warnings were survival codes. Do not wander alone. Do not make unnecessary noise. Do not go into the woods after dark. When the Alutiiq attempted to settle near Portlock in the 1800s, they carried these warnings with them. But as the raids mounted, hunters vanishing, women stalked, strange figures moving just beyond the firelight, they eventually abandoned the land. They carried with them not just their belongings but stories sharp and vivid enough to pass unchanged through generations. By the early 20th century, a new wave of settlers decided to try again. In 1921, mostly Alutiiq and Aleut families joined by other workers built Portlock into a proper town. They had industry, a salmon cannery, a schoolhouse, even a post office. For the first time, Portlock looked like it might last, but survival here meant discipline. From the start, the villagers lived under a strict rulebook. There were curfews at nightfall. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Hunters traveled in pairs. Children were warned not to laugh or shout near the woods. To outsiders, these might have seemed like quaint traditions, but to Portlock's people, they were rules of survival. For nearly a decade, these measures worked. The cannery thrived, families grew, and Portlock looked orderly, even safe. But prosperity bred complacency. Patrols became lax. Hunters ventured deeper into the forest. The curfew was ignored. Little by little, the defenses that had kept the settlement alive fell away. The price of that complacency was paid in 1931. A logger named Andrew Cammock, strong and experienced in the wild, went deeper into the woods than most dared. When he didn't return, a search party set out. What they found was so horrific it scarred the town forever. Andrew's body was torn apart, his skull crushed, his sled hurled yards from where he lay as though tossed aside with impossible strength. His sled dogs had been slaughtered, their remains scattered like kindling. Bears could kill, yes, but bears didn't throw heavy sleds, nor did they slaughter without feeding. This was violence for its own sake, violence with a message. This land is not yours. Not long after, a man named Tom Olson reported seeing a massive, hairy figure on the beach. Rifle in hand, he froze, unable to fire at something that looked too monstrous, too alien. His account spread quickly, tying Cammock's death to the creature the Eludiac had always feared, the Nantianak. From that point forward, disappearances mounted. Hunters vanished. Prospectors left no trace. Bodies were found torn apart in ways no one could explain. The Nantianak was no longer a whispered legend. It was flesh and blood, something that could slaughter men and animals alike. For nearly 2 more decades, Portlock lived under its shadow. Curfews returned. Patrols resumed. Families barricaded themselves indoors at dusk. But the fear never lifted. By 1950, it reached a breaking point. Disappearances had become too frequent. Footsteps too heavy to belong to a man circled cabins at night. Guttural cries echoed through the valley. In a single, collective decision, the people of Portlock fled. Almost overnight, families abandoned homes, businesses, even the cannery. Belongings were left behind as if people meant to return, but they never did. Only the postmaster remained for a short while, stubbornly manning his office. But when deliberate, 2-legged footsteps began circling his barricaded door night after night, he too left, and Portlock was empty. Even in abandonment, Portlock refused to fall silent. Hunters sheltering in its cabins during storms told of guttural growls and heavy bipedal steps crunching outside. Others found massive footprints, some over 18 inches long, pressed deep into the mud. Following one trail, hunters reported signs of a struggle, torn grass, claw marks, and then nothing, as though a moose had been lifted away into the air. Most unnerving of all were the trees. Entire clusters were found ripped from the earth and jammed back into the ground upside down, roots pointing skyward. No storm could do that. To skeptics, these stories are exaggerations or the marks of natural disasters. To believers, they are the unmistakable handiwork of the Nantianak. Even decades later, the memory of Portlock haunted those who had lived there. One Anchorage paramedic recalled treating an elderly Eludiac man who had once called Portlock home. When the paramedic mentioned the village, the man's eyes went wide with terror. "Did you see it?" he asked, clutching at the medic's shirt. "Did it bother you?" Even in old age, under guard in a jail cell, he was still terrified of whatever had haunted his youth. Yet not all elders agreed. Sally Ash, who lived nearby, dismissed the monster theory, saying people left for economic reasons and better opportunities. But her cousin, Melania Kell, insisted the Nantianak was real, that it had killed villagers and stalked the town until they had no choice but to flee. Ironically, Ash once translated for Kell in an interview, then later refuted her own cousin's story. That conflict between testimony and denial has become the beating heart of the Portlock mystery.